Behold, a discussion about something that I raised in a previous parlay. This is my full coffee lock build. Yes, it was requested. No, believe it or not, it wasn't just me masquerading as another person requesting parlay. Mocharaid asks if I could detail my full coffee lock build. Mocharaid specifically says, watching DerpTW's previous parlay, I was very taken by your concept of a coffee lock build and wanted to know how you'd build one out from 1 to 20 if your DM said just go wild. Oh. Stuff like what race, what class you'd start with, when you'd multi-class, spells, feats, and ASIs. I'd like you to go as in-depth as you can stomach. We will go as in-depth as all of that without literally making a character sheet. How about that? Excellent. So, the very first thing that I'd want to discuss when talking about a coffee lock is this is a multi-class character in Dungeons & Dragons that if you're not familiar with, I'll explain in this parlay how it works. I didn't come up with it. That uses magic in a very unique way. So there's a ton of character building. There's a lot of lore in there. Now, it doesn't really seem like Mocharaid you're that interested in that, which is fine. Nothing in the many things you mentioned specifically in your question is the flavor of the character. You seem to just want the mechanical part of the build, and that's completely fine. I am very interested in the flavor, and I do think that one of the things about the coffee lock is that you are kind of fiddling with the mechanics of the world in a way that other builds don't, by storing magic in a way that other builds don't. There really aren't any other D&D builds that I can think of anyway that store magic quite in this way. And so I do think that lore is more connected to this type of character. I would also like to say that I think the coffee lock is a pretty extreme character. I don't think that this character is more powerful in any meaningful way than other characters, but they are powerful in a very different way, which is all that really matters anyway. It's a role-playing game, not a game where you really win or lose, and your DM is modulating the difficulty to the group, of course. But the coffee lock does gain a very extreme ability. In short, you gain the ability to cast a propensity of first and second level spells at rates far surpassing what most other spellcasters could in exchange for higher level spells, pretty much. There are ways to give or take fiddle with that, although personally I'm going to be avoiding them. I'm most interested in really embracing what makes that unique and not making a character that does the thing but then also, has the normal spellcaster stuff. And I'll talk about why. You might change your mind and decide to do it a different way, but I'll talk about that. The point I'm getting at is that I think that if you play a coffee lock, it really modulates that extreme difference in power if you lean into the role playing a little bit more, if you have a backstory and a plan for your character. Players, I would also like to suggest that your DM is more likely to agree to let you do this if you have like a really cool idea for what it will add to the campaign, rather than it seeming like you're just trying to abuse a system a certain way. I don't think this actually does that, but it's also a good mental check for yourself. Are you trying to just abuse a system and be really powerful and dunk on your friends? Because that sucks and you shouldn't do that. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin by doing what I believe you ought to do if you're going to play the coffee lock. Well, we're going to make some coffee. Yes, and then we'll begin talking about the build. So we're going to start at level 1. Now, a lot of people's campaigns won't start at level 1 and won't go to level 20. But you said 1 to 20, and people start at level 1. And so we shall. Level 1. There's a couple decisions to make right away, and we need to explain how the build works, but we'll do that in just a moment if you're not familiar with this character, because you won't be a coffee lock, quote unquote, for a lot of your career. You'll have to get that set up. And so it does matter quite a bit what you are until then. And there's a couple different approaches. Again, we're going to talk about that a little later. Right now, we need to be a person. We need to pick a race. We're going to pick what class to start as, and kind of what direction to go in. And some of these things won't make sense right away, and I'll talk about why later. I'm going to start as a sorcerer, and I'm going to be a fairy. Fairies have the ability to fly, and this is something that you don't get as a spellcaster easily without third level spell slots, like a bit higher level. A recurring theme in this parlay is that I'm going to approach building a coffee lock by trying to save spell slots where I can. I'm not going to use the coffee lock as a way to say anything that costs spell slots, I just have infinite of that. Because here's the thing. When we talk about how you get these later, if your campaign doesn't have a lot of downtime in it, you could gain something from playing a coffee lock, but it will be taxed. You'll get more spell slots, more low-level spell slots, but not a ridiculous number of them. You'll get like a dozen, not like 100, If you played a campaign where there was like a year of downtime, yeah, you pretty much have infinite spell slots. Like, you shouldn't gain the ability to fly or armor or ritual spells or any of that stuff, because you do basically just have infinite spell slots. Like, if you lived your life as a coffee lock and you kept it going for years, I just pointed to myself that I didn't even intend to do that. That's kind of creepy. Warlock Pact, anyway. You could kind of disregard pretty much anything you could accomplish with magic, right? But in most D&D campaigns, there won't be that kind of downtime, which means that the coffee lock will be really more balanced, for one thing. But the big point is, you're not going to have an extreme, inexhaustible number of spell slots. I believe you still highly value things that let you cast a lot of spells or do something that would be worth a lot of spell slots without paying spell slots. Does that make sense? So things like flight, we are going to get some rituals in a certain way in a little bit. Those might seem like they kind of contradict the idea of a spellcaster that has like way more small spell slots. And we'll explain how we're going to get those in a minute. I know some of you probably already know, but if you don't, we'll get there. But I still think it matters to have, stuff like that. Another thing that fairies get that I'm going to be doing a lot of is cantrips. Cantrips are, spells you can spam as much as you want. And this character, the coffee lock, just a normal coffee lock, happens to be set up to have basically the most cantrips of any 2-class multi-class character. And I think that's cute and fun and fits the magical utility monkey that is slinging spells in every situation very, very well. A fairy, even from a lore perspective, I think fits that pretty well, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I like the idea that you get a cantrip. It's a pretty hardcore, limited, specific utility cantrip, but we're going to have like 13 cantrips, so I think that's fine. And enlarge reduce. I like enlarge reduce. So you're a fairy, you want to be small. I think you want to be small. You can fly. This will keep you much safer during the beginning levels, and that's good because this is going to take a little bit of setup. If you get to the later levels, especially the medium levels, you are going to gain some very, very incredible stats, some very incredible assets for your character's build, so you really want to survive those early levels. Your DM would be right to be a little harder on you early on because they know what is to come. And being able to fly will basically just brick a lot of the monster manual. If you get attacked by wolves in the middle of the woods, could be a really interesting, really exciting low-level encounter, and it is absolutely no danger to you if you can just fly out of the way. Again, this doesn't mean you'll be invulnerable, your DM will adjust, but they probably won't eliminate natural problems just because you can fly. They'll be there and they just won't be of danger to you, so that's very helpful. They'll still be of danger to your party members. You'll just be able to support them from the air, like an artillery platform in the sky, firing various beams down at your opponents. We'll get there. So a fairy, and I want to be a small fairy because enlarge reduce will let you be a tiny fairy. And being, small to tiny, the way sizes work is a little weird. Medium to small is not a huge difference, but then small to tiny really is. So being able to just turn into something minuscule and fly into a cliffside or whatever is a very effective way to hide from most creatures. And I do think that's a really valuable asset, especially early on. Additionally, when you're a spellcaster, being really small doesn't reduce your output. So making yourself extremely tiny and then firing big bongo damage out of your hands is effective against some enemies. It may simply be challenging for enemies to tell where that damage is coming from if they're not very close to you. Another fun trick is to be on a party member and fire from their location, which, unless enemies are very close, makes it look like you are attacking from them. It doesn't look like there's multiple people there. It looks like there's just some guy popping off with spells coming out of them, and they've also got a sword and shield, and they're just going nuts. And it's only when people get really close that they realize, oh, I'm kind of outnumbered. Yike. I won't touch too much on the aesthetics of this character. Now, I have a character like this in a campaign I'm DMing. There's an NPC that is this character, but I won't get into them too much, just in case my players are watching. But that's something I'm interested in. Again, Mocharaid, it just kind of seemed like you weren't. So I'm adding a light bit of lore and flavor where I can. Personally, I think that if you play a fairy of this kind, you're not going to be... This is not necessarily a very playful character. This character is going to do some serious stuff. This character is going to be a bit crazy as well. And, you know, they will be drinking the coffee. We'll get back to it later. Let me just give this a swirl to stop the brewing. Very nice. You see a little bit of off-gassing in there still, but nothing to worry about. Smells pretty good. I used the dark roast of coffee for this because I thought it would fit the stereotypical classic over-caffeinated staying up for multiple nights on end. If you don't know how a coffee lock works, you're about to learn. But we'll leave that there to cool for a little bit. What I was getting at is that you could flavor your fairy as flying without wings, like they can just innately fly. I do think that that's a really good way to be a little more incognito as well. One thing about being a fairy, if you have like dragonfly wings, that's really cool. That's really pretty. I'm into that. I don't know. But the thing is, it makes it, you're very noticeable. You know, I feel like there is an advantage to looking a bit more normal. Like you could sort of pass as like a weird looking halfling, maybe. I'd think that is an objective advantage most of the time. So for what it's worth, if you're asking mostly about a build, I think you want your fairy to be flavored as flying without visible wings. They can just float because they're a fey creature. Cool. Being a fey is also nice. Like some things affect humanoids specifically, and you're a fey instead. Good, like good stuff. Not bad. I want to note a few quick things that we don't have from our race. Dark vision, I don't think it's a big deal. We're going to come back to that a little bit later because we're going to get the light cantrip, which is like not a perfect solution, but it's something. And we're also going to be a warlock, which means we have access to Devil's Sight. So gaining dark vision would be a bit of overlap anyway, really. In situations where you would want dark vision, we have two better situationally solutions. And yeah, you can't wear heavy armor. We do also have a lot of magic, and we can fly, which I'm not saying that makes armor pointless. Really, this character is going to be vulnerable to some mental saves as well, and we are going to talk about that later. But personally, I think it's okay that you can't wear very heavy armor. Warlocks have an invocation that lets you spam mage armor on yourself, which is something. It'd be nice to wear medium armor. Like you could pick a winged tiefling, is not a bad idea. Fire resistance is good at a lot of levels. I don't think that's a bad choice. A lot of people do that. Tieflings are just popular because they're good. I mean, they're cool, they're flavorful, there's some backstory baked in, and they're good. They're just cool. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you not to do that, but I'm picking a fairy, and that's why. Cool. So a small fairy specifically, and no visible wings. Good. We're going to start as a sorcerer. Why? Well, the folks that have been patiently waiting for what a coffee lock is need to be given their due. Coffee locks are going to use Sorcerer's ability to turn spell slots into sorcery points and then make those sorcery points into other spell slots. They're going to use that ability to take Warlock spell slots, which you get back on a short rest instead of a long rest. You take a break, you eat lunch rather than like going to bed. You get those back a few times a day. You can turn those into sorcery points and then make them into other spell slots. And those spell slots, they only reset when you go to sleep. So if you never go to sleep, they stay forever. Again, I think it's rather important from a lore perspective. What exactly is happening here? Are you holding this energy in your body? What does that feel like? In my world that I homebrewed, that I DM a campaign for, the magic, your spell slots aren't like stored inside you, but they are sort of a cache of energy that you have a stake on in the ethereal plane. And other creatures might notice that. And when you go unconscious, you lose focus on that stake, or it kind of resets. There are consequences to doing this. Your Warlock patron may have some questions about why you're converting the magic they're giving you as part of their pact with you into this gigantic cache of magical energy. Maybe they think that's rad and they want to join in. Maybe they think that constitutes taking advantage of your contract, which either makes them angry or makes them demand more of you. I don't know. Talk to your DM. Again, it didn't really seem like that was Mocharaid's focus, but I do feel it is a bit more than just the normal, like, make some flavor for your character. I feel like the cool thing about the coffee lock is you get some really good, unique character hooks. Anyway, hickeys, because you're so sexy. Right, yes. A sorcerer. So we're going to pick sorcerer first. We're taking a level in sorcerer. Why? Constitution saving throw proficiency. Eventually, there's going to be some spells I want to concentrate on, and constitution saving throw proficiency is really good. Like, that's really good. It's a bit of a shame because what we get charisma saving throw proficiency either way. Not a big deal, and we're already going to have high charisma. Sorcerers and warlocks both scale their spellcasting with charisma. I think that's good. We'll get back to that a little bit in a minute. But yeah, wisdom saving throw proficiency, which is what we'd get if we picked warlock instead, is good. You know, like default magical damage resistance in some ways, from non-physical magic effects. Dexterity saving throw proficiency would be nice as well. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but I do think constitution saving throw proficiency is kind of better here. Another thing is the spell Intellect Fortress it's interesting because it's going to help you shore up those mental saves and defend yourself against mental magic attacks. And it's concentration, so constitution saving throw proficiency. Anyway, that's good, I think. I think you probably want that if you're going to play this, and a lot of spellcasters. This is a good spell. So yeah, sorcerers. I think constitution saving throw proficiency is good. I think we want that. Charisma saving throw proficiency is kind of not a good use of space, but we don't have a way around it because we need to be these two classes for the reason I explained before. Otherwise, not really any reason we're starting as a sorcerer specifically. I am going to be taking levels in warlock first, and I'll explain why, but I just think we want the starting sorcerer stuff. So we're going 1 in sorcerer, and then we're about to go some levels in warlock. Before we go, we want to pick some skill proficiencies. Now, I'm going to recommend picking things in a kind of unique way. As Coffee Lock, we're going to gain the ability to cast low-level spells very, very, very frequently. One pair of low-level spells that is particularly of interest here, in my opinion, is Borrowed Knowledge and Enhance Ability. You can give yourself proficiency and advantage at any skill check for a couple of spell slots. For a normal spellcaster, this would blow through their low-level spell slots at an unreasonable rate. But for you, you've got some to burn here. I mean, if you need the utility, you're in a dungeon and you just need to find your way out of the situation, and you don't have a party member that's good at the check you want, you can just magic it. Again, you can't do this all the time, but there is no way to replicate that ability, to just get any arbitrary proficiency you want and then have advantage at it. There is no other build that can do that as relatively on command as we can, as many times in a row as we can. So what I'm going to recommend doing is, again, we want to focus on saving spell slots. That's great, but we don't want to have to do it all the time. You probably still want to pick, perception proficiency, and also this unique way you're going to pick proficiencies. You want to think about which skills you would want to be proficient in, and you wouldn't want someone to see you magically giving yourself proficiency, mostly social things. If you're persuading someone and you've got to convince them to help you out, you can't just go magic yourself quickly. They're going to be like, what's going on? What are you doing? What is that? Did you just mind control me? It's suspicious. You want proficiency in the things where you wouldn't want to show yourself casting spells when you need proficiency. So in general, charisma stuff. Wisdom and intelligence stuff, a lot of the time you're in the wilderness or in a dungeon, or you do have a minute to go recoup your thoughts or something. It's okay to have bad scores at those things. You can just magic yourself to having good ones when you need it. One of the major payoffs of this strategy. So I would recommend picking mostly charisma-based skills, and also things like perception that you will use so often that it would be a bit of a tax on spell slots. You know, perception is an interesting one, right? Like, because a lot of your party members probably will have good perception, you may skip that. And then, in the rare situation where no one is around with good perception except you could then magic yourself into having it. I feel like a lot of the time you use perception, you actually could cast magic and it wouldn't be suspicious. So that's something to think about. You might be able to skip it. You will not have high wisdom with this build, so it's not going to be like amazing. Anyway, just something to think about. But mostly I would pick charisma skills. You will be a bit of a magical skill monkey, a bit of a rogue bard kind of thing. So keep that in mind when you pick your skills. You know, you might be thinking, but this is a bit of a utility pick. Yeah, that's a thing that you're going to be very good at. So yeah. Okay, now some warlock levels. The moment that you are able to coffee lock is when you are 2 levels into sorcerer, you have font of magic, you can turn spell slots into sorcery points into spell slots, and you have 1 level in warlock. You can now get spell slots back in a short rest, even though it's only a few level 1 spell slots if you're a level 1 warlock. And you can technically turn them into sorcery points into spell slots and then store them. You can technically do that at level 3 if you wanted to. Here's the thing. You gain so little by doing it that I don't really feel like it's entirely worth it. You can store very few sorcery points at that level. You just don't get a lot of value, and you don't have an easy way to eliminate exhaustion. 2 things I mean by that. The first one is you can become a celestial warlock and gain greater restoration to remove the exhaustion from yourself from not sleeping over and over again, not properly resting. But the other thing is that you might be able to just pay someone to cast greater restoration on you, but not at level 3. Like, you probably won't be able to make enough money or even find someone to cast that rather expensive spell on you at 5th level, or you might have a party member that can do it, but probably not yet, right? So I believe beelining the coffee lock thing is not very good. You might have a DM that rules that something like that being a warforged means you not only don't have to sleep, you also don't have to rest. I would disagree, but your DM might not, in which case, sure, coffee lock your heart out from level 3. But I'm not going to do that, and that's why. My DM telling me to go nuts doesn't make me want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want there to be restrictions. I think that sounds fun. So we've jumped into sorcerer at level 1, and now what we're going to do is go warlock until we find the conditions that let us eliminate exhaustion. And the moment that happens, we're going to take 1 more level in sorcerer and start coffee locking. Does that make sense? So we got 1 level in sorcerer. Now we're going to go as a warlock. If we find someone we can pay, or a party member gains the ability to remove exhaustion from us, we're good. And our next level, we go sorcerer level 2, and we start doing the coffee lock thing. If we don't find anyone, I am going to pick to be a celestial warlock, and I'll explain why. And that means that eventually we'll solve the problem ourselves. So if you get to level, it's like 10th level or so total, and you haven't found another way to solve this problem, you're good. You know, it'll just work in the medium levels. Excellent. I would like to here point out that you could build a coffee lock, like I mentioned before, to be, you know, very much a single class character, but you just do the minimum required to be able to do the coffee lock thing. I said I was really interested in leaning into this might be one of the only multi-class characters that really benefits in some way. It's a trade-off, but benefits in some way from really mixing both subclasses and classes, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to be aiming to go to level 11 as a warlock. This gains you 3 5th level spell slots every short rest. That's a lot. And you would have to go to, I believe, 17th level to get a 4th 5th level spell slot as a warlock every short rest. So it's a very good way to min-max the amount you get from coffee locking, and, you know, as soon as possible. So we got our first level as a sorcerer. Now we want to make coffee lock worth the most spell slots as quickly as possible, stopping at level 11 as a warlock, and then we'll take the rest as sorcerer stuff, probably. So what are we doing? What does our character do? Well, until we get the coffee lock thing online, which is probably going to be like 4 to 7 levels on average. Remember, at 9th level, if you have a party member that could cast Greater Restoration, like a cleric, they will gain the ability to cast it. So you're looking at, you know, you're going to go around 7-ish levels as a warlock, and your party will be level 8 or 9 or so around then. So that may be a time when people will naturally be able to remove exhaustion from you. You might find a magic item too, but anyway, we're planning to be a warlock for a while, basically. I'm going to pick a celestial warlock. I would like the healing. This character can do pretty much everything except heal. I feel like let's gain the ability to heal a little bit. Why not? This is a character that thrives on being able to do whatever is called for, not one thing very well. So the fact that you're kind of a whatever healer is, to me, not really a problem. And you get 2 cantrips. I'm very excited to have a variety of cantrips here. In addition, when you have a lot of cantrips, and we're not going to have high-level spells, cantrips scale with proficiency as you level up in general. The thing about having a lot of cantrips this way is that multiple different options for an attack cantrip gets a little bit better. There isn't much of an opportunity cost because we have so many. We can get like all the good utility cantrips. A quick list of the cantrips that I want this character to have once we're a sorcerer, which get like 4 cantrips, and a warlock, and I'm going to be taking Pact to the Tome in a little bit. I'll talk about it in a sec. And we're also a fairy, so we get that cantrip. We're looking at, here's my list off the top of my head. Eldritch Blast, Druidcraft, Prestidigitation, Thaumaturgy, Shape Water, Minor Illusion, maybe Message or Friends, depending on how your campaign, your DM rules them. Maybe both, maybe one or the other. There's a spell called, what's that spell called? The thing where you take a thought out of your head and you make a thought strand, and it's a wizard only spell, and it's from the Ravnica book, and it lets you like encode thoughts. Yes. These are extremely niche spells, some of them. You're telling me you already have Prestidigitation, Minor Illusion, Shape Water, and Thaumaturgy, and you still want Druidcraft? What the hell is wrong with you? Just the ability to tell the weather and like make a beautiful flower or something and make it look more natural does add something to a character that has so many cantrips that it's like irrelevant. You don't need more functionality. Really, I think more specific utility is sort of better. Another thing is that this character is building up to be able to kind of magically masquerade as being many different kinds of people. One of the most interesting things to me about Pact of the Tome warlocks is that their ability to get cantrips from any class lets them do basic magical things that make them look like they are a member of a lot of different classes, which has role-playing potential. You can appear to be a cleric, you can appear to be a druid from the outside, in a few minor, but it might be enough ways, by casually using a type of magic that is typical of them. I just think that is theoretically really good. You're also kind of like, this character is shaping up to be a sort of magical rogue or bard. So I do think the idea that you can kind of put on an appearance of being something you're not is like, that's cool. That sounds fun and good. We are kind of playing into being a utility character. So that is something very nice. I also really like, rogues have this thing that often happens where they feel encouraged to get good skills. And a rogue often ends up being like the face of the group with decent charisma. This is not a thing everyone does, but it kind of happens sometimes. But it's awkward because you're not really gaining much from that charisma. It just sort of feels thematic or like it fits your niche. This is a character, on the other hand, that is focused on charisma and splashes a little bit of like dexterity. And you're not the least stealthy character. You can fly and hover and stuff, and you have the ability to become tiny and stuff like that. You're a good scout in a way. I like my scout being good at charisma stuff as well. You get caught and then you talk your way out of it a little. And again, this ability to kind of magically masquerade as somebody with different capabilities is appealing to me. Like, that sounds cool. So that's that. Pact of the Tome. What else? Well, I said that I think cantrips are good because you're going to spam spells all the time. You save a lot of spell slots in some ways. You get a lot of options. You get Sacred Flame from being a Celestial Warlock, which gives you an option against enemies behind cover. I am going to be firing Eldritch Blast and something else we'll get to in a minute. A bunch of beams. And so if enemies duck behind something, we're not a normal spellcaster like a single class sorcerer that would just bomb the room with fireballs. We're not as good at that. You can still do it. Like, it's fine. You could go 5 levels into sorcerer. That'll probably happen when you're like level 17, but eventually, I guess. But we're not as good at it. That's not this character's speciality. We have Hunger of Hadar. It's not like you can't do it, but this character is gonna make up for their weakness at those things by being a very powerful sort of machine gun of spells. Cover is a lot better against us than other types of spellcasters. So Sacred Flame is better than it sounds like it is. Like, I think that will come up. Additionally, I think that if you were gonna have 13 cantrips, light, you might think light, come on, like, big deal. If you have 13 cantrips, I think light is one of the 13 best cantrips. You put it on something and throw it as a distraction. You cast Magic Mouth on a tent stake and have it scream, and then chuck it into a group of dudes, and it suddenly there's this luminous thing that's going ah in the middle of their camp, and they freak out. Come on, like, live a little. I think light is kind of good. And again, it supplements. I'm going to be taking Devil's Sight, the invocation. We'll talk about that in a sec. That gives us dark vision when we need to use it. But I like the idea, again, of being able to masquerade as like we seem to be using a light, but then the light goes out and we can still see, but they maybe don't expect that. That could be a trick in some social situations. Not the worst idea. And again, lights can just be good distractions. Or you might have other party members that just can't see in the dark. I think light is perfectly fine. You get it for free by being a subclass that lets you remove exhaustion so you don't die of sleep deprivation. And, you know, it's good for other stuff. You get healing. There are other good spells. Don't you get Bless as a Celestial Warlock? Anyway, I believe you do. And that's kind of a big deal because the way I'm going to attack people with this character is mostly by using Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast while using Devil's Sight and Darkness. Darkness is one of the spells I really don't want to break concentration on. I'm probably going to float with Darkness deployed somewhere and spam Eldritch Blast with a bunch of advantage and Bless to make it hyper accurate. And then later, I'm going to be adding even more beams a different way. So they're all going to get advantage. They're all going to get that +4, that D4. That's very, very, very good. That's great. We're getting very consistent damage. It scales with proficiency because it's Eldritch Blast is a cantrip. And as we increase our charisma, which we're going to do for sorcerers and warlocks, it's a great way to lean into the advantages of being a multi-classed character. We're not trying to have high-level spells do a bunch of damage. Warlocks are very well equipped to use their powerful cantrip and agonizing blast to really take advantage, like make the best of not having higher-level spells. This is one of the strengths of the Coffee Lock, is that it kind of plays to the strengths of D&D as a system. Like, if you don't have a single class at a high level, what's the thing that gets the least less powerful? Cantrips. So that's a good way to do a lot of damage. And again, you have Sacred Flame if they hide behind something. Cool. And a ton of just like all of the cantrips. I'll quickly go through a few that I said I wanted and explain why. Shape Water. You can freeze things to break them. You can make small objects out of ice. You can cool drinks. You can create blocks of ice in the water to walk over or build a bridge or float on or whatever. Your DM might be willing to rule that you can make a minor inconvenience by freezing water under someone's feet. They're standing in ankle-deep water or in a swamp. You can just freeze that, and perhaps it will inconvenience them a little bit. Maybe they do a strength save to try to get out, or else they can't move for the turn. Something minor, but it's also a non-threatening way to do things. And I do think this character is, again, shaping up to be a really good, adaptable social character. So having non-lethal options to inconvenience people without, like, hurting them is something that a character like this is equipped to use. A high charisma character with a ton of versatility. So I like that. Thaumaturgy. You can use it to open doors to see through them and see if anyone is beyond. You can use it to make your voice louder. It can be pretty subtle. Again, you can use it to freak people out like civilians. Again, it lets you do the kind of masquerading as a cleric thing a little bit, maybe. Especially a cult. Like, that might be very effective for infiltrating a cult. Yeah, Thaumaturgy is cool in my opinion. Again, it might seem like a lot of overlap, but remember, you have 13 cantrips. Who cares if there's a lot of overlap? Do you have 13 cantrips? I keep saying that. It's a lot of cantrips, okay? You have a lot from being a sorcerer, and then there's sorcerer subclasses that will give you more, and you get some, yeah, it is like, it's like 11 to 13, depending on which subclasses you take. It's a lot, okay? Many. Pact of the Tome also lets you get such good invocations. Pact of the Tome is such gas for invocations. We are going to be a lot of a warlock, so Far Scribe to be able to cast Sending a bunch of times without spell slots, not taxing those medium level spell slots too much. You have the thing where you can write someone's name in your book, and it's like the reverse death note. It's the life note, and they can come back to life. You can save them from death, every so often. I think those are both really good. Your DM might rule that Aspect of the Moon makes you immune to exhaustion from not sleeping. I wouldn't. I think you're still not resting, which means that's what I would say. But anyway, check. If that's the case, that's a pretty obvious reason to take Pact of the Tome. I think Pact of the Tome, like the thing itself sounds not very exciting, but the invocations are so sick. You just get to take the ritual caster feat as an invocation. Pick detect magic and then something janky. Is Magic Mouth a ritual? That's not a bad choice. Detect magic, and there's a lot of things, of course. But yeah, you can pick from a ton of rituals. Pick detect magic. And sorcerers and warlocks don't normally become ritual casters, which is awkward. And this means that you are saving a lot of spell slots. So again, I just think there's a ton of utility, and you actually still might have an invocation or two. You got Devil's Sight, Agonizing Blast, and 3 Pact of the Tome invocations. Is that okay? Where are we? Let me try some of this coffee while I look that up. Pretty good. Little break to talk about the role-playing thing again. Yeah, like, I think there should be something you're doing during the downtime. What do you spend your time on while your party member is asleep? By the way, I was wrong. You get exactly 5 invocations. So it's those 5. Agonizing Blast, Devil's Sight. Take those first, and then take the 3 Pact of the Tome invocations that I mentioned. Probably you can take the one where you can spam sending a bunch. You can probably take that last. I think you want the one that saves your life as soon as possible, but it's got a level lower limit. And then the ritual casting one is good. Remember that you're kind of playing the long game with spell slots. If you can save them, they'll really add up. Anyway, yeah, I would not agree as your DM that when you don't take a long rest, thus preventing your spell slots from resetting, you cannot take a bunch of short rests to make up for that. A lot of people argue you can do that. I don't think that makes any sense. The main reason is that when you take a short rest to get your spell slots back as a warlock, that's your patron giving you magic. They're not suddenly willing to give you more magic just because you didn't go to bed. I'm your warlock patron as your DM, and I don't care at all that you're just not sleeping. I'm not going to give you magic again 4 more times just because you technically have the time to take those short rests. Your DM might disagree. You might play a very mechanically focused game, and it sort of makes sense that you could do that if you look at the rules and don't think about why the rules are like that. But in my opinion, that literally isn't D&D. D&D doesn't intend to be played that way. So go figure. You decide for yourself. Mocharaid, I hope it doesn't offend you when I say I suspect you may be that kind of player, which is fine. I do believe that D&D doesn't, like, that's technically following the letter of the rules, but D&D also has written in the book of the rules that it's sort of not meant to be a game where you don't interpret a little bit like what the rules actually mean. So that's just something to think about. If you find it fun, that's cool. I would consider that it might be fun to have some limit like that. And coffee locks are not like bad just because you don't get an obscene amount of spell slots from that chain short rest thing. Incidentally, if you do this build and you get to like 11th level as a warlock, and then you chain short rests while people take a long rest, 1 night gives you an ungodly amount of spell slots. So for what it's worth, I do actually think it's just like bad balance as well. So anyway, speaking of balance, this might be around the time we want to go back and be a sorcerer. And we do very badly want to get to 3rd level as a sorcerer because it lets us take meta magic. Meta magic gives us a few very valuable things. Quicken spell is really the big one. Being able to quicken Scorching Ray alongside Eldritch Blast with Bless and advantage from Devil's Sight and Darkness is insanity. Like, you will hit with pretty much every shot, pretty much every time. You will do so much damage. You can split it among 7, like-ish targets, or focus it all on one. So it's incredibly adaptable, kind of piecemeal damage at higher levels when you get more beams on Eldritch Blast. And to top all of that off, you, will get crits. You get advantage on 7 attack rolls every round. What the hell? And you might be thinking, you're going to use Quicken Spell every single round? What the... Oh, right, you have basically infinite spell slots, so you can just turn them into sorcery points. You can't have infinite sorcery points, but as long as you have a pool of 6 or whatever, you can fill them up before each combat, and then, 3 rounds of combat where you fire a million disco ball beams out of your hands, even though you're a tiny fairy this big, and you just go ha, and like 7 beams of death come out of your hand. You won't need more than 3 rounds of combat most of the time, unless something is going very wrong. So I do think meta magic is a huge deal for this character. It really builds into the strengths of, you know, trying to make up for not having single powerful spells by using cantrips and the ability to cast more spells. You can make up for the action economy. Twinned spell is also really good. The time where this character is probably the most threatened is not where raw firepower is needed, and also we can fly. It's against several, like a few intelligent opponents, like another enemy squad of player character equivalents. Like if your party encounters a group of enemies that is basically you, like the more similar they are to you, the weaker this character gets. The smarter and the more medium number the enemies are, the less this character's advantages come to the fore. So being able to use Twin Spell on something as simple as like hold person or whatever is actually, I think, really good to shore up this character's weaknesses. So I would recommend going for those two. Subtle Spell is a very nice get out of jail free card that will come up like once in your career, but then save your life. Very much in the vein of like Featherfall. Is, you know, you'll cast it one time, and that one time you would have died if you didn't cast it. Except that you can fly. So Subtle Spell is for like if you get silenced and then your hands get tied, then you can't do verbal and somatic components, and then Subtle Spell lets you get out of that. It's a shame because I'm planning to be an aberrant mind sorcerer, and that means that if we went far enough, you eventually will if you play to like level 20, but most people don't. You will get the ability to cast psionic spells, which basically lets you do that for a few of your spells. I don't think that's that amazing personally, but that's just me. Speaking of which, Aberrant Mind Sorcerer also gives you Mind Sliver as a cantrip. Now you can retrain it into something. I don't think you really need to. Mind Sliver is great when the brute force approach won't quite work and you need to make them fail a save. It targets intelligence saves, so it'll probably hit, and then they'll get that reduction to a save, and then you nail them with some like hold person or something. Not a bad non-lethal option when you're going to get rough, but you're not going to kill them. Spellcasters often have a little bit more trouble with that. They're not just punching someone and then the DM can say like, how hard do you punch them so you don't have to kill them. If you're throwing a fireball at them, you can't like throw less of a fireball. So, you know, I do think that can be valuable. And Mind Sliver is a good subtle option. It's not very subtle to take out your hands and go, die! And then like 50 laser beams come out of your hand. Yeah, people know that you're attacking someone with magic. So having something more subtle like Mind Sliver is good. You might be thinking, do you need 3 attack options? Eldritch Blast, Sacred Flame, and Mind Sliver? But the thing is, 13 cantrips. Speaking of cantrips, we have a lot of first and second level spell slots, and one thing that we'll begin to do as we're getting into the middle levels, we're going to fight a lot of things that do elemental damage, and we'll be fighting, you know, it'll just be harder enemies. We'll be fighting bosses of the first arc of the campaign and beyond. And this is where being able to spam absorb elements and shield and mind sliver, silvery barbs is going to be really good. A lot of spellcasters do this, but they can't do it every single round because it will deplete their spell slots in a full day of fighting. You can do this every single round like it's going out of style. You can use silvery barbs every single round for like years without running out of spell slots. So it is also really nice to have Sacred Flame is an attack roll, if I remember correctly. I hope it is. I should quickly check if it is. Because you also want something that lets you use the advantage that you get from that. If you just need really consistent damage. Sacred Flame is a dex save, curses. You may want to take something like, but do you want to take Firebolt? Because you already have Scorching Ray. If they're immune to fire damage, you're not going to be happy. You wouldn't use Scorching Ray while you were doing this because you have 1 advantage. Anyway, it makes you more versatile. You probably just give the advantage to a party member like your Barbarian or whatever. But it's something to think about if you wanted to get even more attack cantrips. Speaking of which, there actually are a few others that I'm interested in. I think stuff like Shocking Grasp is kind of good in this situation. It's good because I think if you're a utility character like this that falls behind a little on power, gaining little specific advantages like that is nice. When Shocking Grasp is good, and you're in the darkness and you have Devil's Sight, and you can just walk up and tap them and get the benefits from attacking someone with armor, that's good. It's normally criticized because it's too niche, and you have to set it up, it's kind of vulnerable, and the benefits are just not that big. But there are some benefits, and why do you need to not take it? You have 2 million cantrips, you know? So for what it's worth, I think that, and like Heat Metal is another really good example. Heat Metal is an ultra specific spell, but I mean, we're in the business of taking advantage of what damage we can get. So I think that's a really, really good choice. This will be a fairly methodical character a lot of the time. You're going to want to scout out and plan out what you're going to use in your kit that lets you attack enemies in the most effective way. Cool. What else? That's a lot of it. Probably want some backup weapon, like what? I don't know. Like, I don't know, like you probably do want to carry around a light crossbow. Yes, you said feats and ASIs. Well, I don't have a lot to say. You know, you're obviously going to have your characters start with a 15 in charisma if you don't roll for stats, which I don't. You're going to start with a 15 in charisma, and then you're going to add your +2 from your race, so you'll be at 17, which means, as usual, you're going to take an ASI, so +2, and then a half feat, you know, a hybrid feat, to get to 20. So you're at 17 wisdom, you need 3 more points, you'll take an ASI and a hybrid feat. So what hybrid feat? This is a little bit hard. I think a lot of the normal, really good hybrid feats are basically things that we are very good at. Like Fey Touched is a really, really good hybrid feat that would work, but on this specific character, it doesn't really do anything. It gives us a little bit more spellcasting of the exact level that we have a preposterously large amount of, and it would let you get things like Bless, which we already have, or like Misty Step, which we already have. We already have a ton of spell slots for that. So you gain very little by picking that, I think. You might have some specific spell you want, go figure. You know, a lot of the initiate feats are basically mini multiclassing, and they give you like a cantrip and stuff, which we just don't need. Telekinesis is good, but is kind of like that. We just don't, this is what that character's already the best at. We don't need it. Although picking Mage Hand as a cantrip would be nice. Even more cantrips. It's not the worst idea, okay? But that's what I think. No, I think that this character is probably more keen on something like Chef or Inspiring Leader, like something like that. Is Inspiring Leader a hybrid? But anyway, something like that gives you some kind of like pretty specific, maybe out of combat benefit to add even more versatility. Chef is not a bad idea. It would kind of bolster your kit as a supportive kind of backup healer. You can sort of make a mini mana potion for the group, and you sort of have a heal. You get a little mini healing kit. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the idea that this character has like all the magic, but just has some like weirdly specific esoteric thing that they do is kind of a fun lore idea, that this character is a jack of all trades, even non-magically. Like they're a person of many talents, and it would be weird to find a rough and tumble adventurer that's good at making pastries, but this would be that guy. Like, and it also kind of fits the Feywild. So I like that. So Chef, go Chef. Chef gives you +1 to charisma, right? As an option. Anyway, you can figure it out, but something like that. I think a lot of the feats that are normally the really go-tos are not very good on this character, which is probably a positive for some people because you get a bit of variety. Cool stuff. I would like to quickly note that if you do the build the way I'm suggesting, you don't get very many. Like, that's all you'll get. You're 1 level in Sorcerer, and then you're waiting until you can do the coffee lock thing, get rid of the exhaustion, to take another level or 2 in Sorcerer. But you're kind of beelining 11th level as a Warlock, which means you only get 2 ability score increases. After that, you can take, level 4 as a Sorcerer, and then you'll get 1, or go further as a Warlock and you'll get 1. But by the time you're set up and you're level 14, a lot of campaigns are ending around now, you've only gotten 2 ability score increases, so you can kind of just barely get there. Yeah. Anyway, so something to think about. For what it's worth, you won't delay that progression very much, because you're only taking that 1 level Sorcerer dip until you can do the coffee lock thing. So you are kind of beelining, 8th level, it'll be 9th level for you. You'll get to 20 in charisma. So it's not that bad. I think this is a for a character that is splitting their multiclassing, I think the way to make it the least punishing is to not split it until you're already relatively high level, because then you're not losing relatively as much. You already have 5th level spells, and you're just losing like faster access to 7th level spells. You get a Mystic Arcanum from being an 11th level Warlock, so you'll get a 6th level spell. All you're really doing is delaying the much higher level spells, and most campaigns don't even get to 9th level spells. So you're really only delaying your 7th and 8th level spells, making you surprisingly similar to a single class Warlock with all the benefits of the coffee lock thing. I do nevertheless want to clarify that I would, after 11th level Warlock, go the rest in Sorcerer, probably. Maybe not to 20th level, but like, you know, getting to level 6 as a sorcerer, if you're going to go Aberrant Mind. I do think Psionic spells is really good. A lot of the sorcerer spells you get and the Aberrant Mind spells you get are nice, like they add to your kit. There's a tiny bit of overlap with your Warlock stuff, but I still think it's really good. And you can adapt those Psionic spells as well. You can change them to be spells of a couple of schools. Like that's really good. There's a lot of versatility there that I would play with that I think is really good. I would go like a split character like that. I just don't think you lose that much. Like, again, you're mostly losing like realistically 7th or maybe 8th level spells. It's really not that bad. And this is a character that gains the most from splitting it up. You still get a lot of sorcerer stuff. Meta magic is pretty important to get more meta magic options. If you get there, which I don't know if you do actually, but a bigger sorcery point pool is a fairly big deal. So you can store more ammo for a quicken spell. That's actually a fairly big deal. Getting some more 3rd level spells is nice, so you have a more rounded set without having to convert them. Or 3rd level, not slots because you're not going to sleep, but anyway, 3rd level spells. So you have a bigger repertoire when you... It's not as efficient to convert your sorcery points into 3rd level spells, but that's a thing. At this point, we're just rambling. So that's the build. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun with it. I hope that was what you wanted. That's what I would do. Background. This is one where it's really just lore. You're pretty much getting a couple proficiencies, which I talked about at the beginning, and picking, you know, what kind of, I said kind of an esoteric origin, something sort of humble or very utilitarian. I don't think some kind of grand origin makes altogether that much sense. I'm imagining a character who lived in the backwoods and has this really weird way of using magic that they maybe don't even know is that strange. Their Warlock Pact is like sort of low key on the surface. They haven't really been doing that much with it. It's just kind of something that happened. Maybe even more of a family thing to blend sorcerers who get their magic kind of innately and warlocks who get it from a pact. Could be a combination of the two. I feel like that fits the lore of this character very well, but again, it doesn't seem like that's what you were interested in. I could do a whole parlay just about that, but I hope that you enjoyed this one that was more about like mechanically what and why I would do those things. So, cheers. And thanks for asking a really fun question.